U.S. National Security State and the Federal Bureau of Investigations are sending full entire SWAT units in order to get a Pentagon whistleblower that released documents proving that the U.S. government and corporate media have been lying to us about the larger proxy war that's happening right now between the United States and Russia. A war that actually involves American soldiers and American troops on the ground there that are very involved in this conflict that no one really knew about beforehand. This as the current president of the United States, who's talking about licking the world, just finally decided to address the Pentagon Papers, as of course his administration was telling you previously before that they didn't really exist, that they were fake, that they were manipulated, all according to unnamed security sources that the corporate media, of course, was regurgitating without even questioning, running their propaganda lies as if it was true, and with the government caught with lying about the war in Ukraine, lying about the documents that showed them lying about Ukraine. Why should we believe what the president of the United States is saying here? And the answer is you shouldn't. You shouldn't believe any government. As of course, Biden is telling everyone that he's not concerned with the information that has been released here, when a lot of the Americans paying attention and know what's going on here are concerned. The president of the United States said also that some of the top secret information is old in those documents, and that there's going to be a full-blown investigation as these documents were posted on a Discord group. All of this as the corporate media, including the New York Times, Washington Post, the Bellingcat Group, all worked together with federal agencies to go after a 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman who allegedly is responsible for this leak and was apprehended over the weekend. Now, leaks do happen from the government all the time, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of those leaks are usually done by the national security state and promoted, openly talked about, and not punished if they serve a particular interest of the national security state. And if they dare highlight an issue that the national security state does not like, it's pretty clear that they will punish people to the fullest extent of the law and even beyond that. As of course, let's remember here, during the Donald Trump administration, there have been a huge amount of leakers that were celebrated in the corporate media. But now that there's a leaker exposing the Biden administration and its lies, the corporate media is literally working with the FBI to take them down. That right there shows you a clear conflict of interest, very clear unfair play by the media that, of course, is just the lapdog of the national security state.
This whistleblower situation is interesting because part of those leaks stated that the Ukraine is going to be out of anti-Russian defense missiles by like right now, spring, April, May.
Right.
They didn't want people to know that in February, so they kind of like sat on it. But now it's okay to know because they must have reestablished some supply line, right? The people who were behind this hunting down of a whistleblower in this case from the Washington Post, New York Times tag team. The people that are influential over those organizations are the second generation benefactors of the men who killed Kennedy. Now, a little bit of unknown history, because we're talking about the Washington Post, and they were part and parcel in the Kennedy assassination. So let's take a trip over here down memory lane, and let's look at something called Operation Mockingbird. So if we look at Operation Mockingbird, I would explain this to you, but first I should explain Project Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird, if I press this button, let's go up here for Project Mockingbird. This is the Wikipedia entry on it. I wouldn't trust this whole entry, but here's the gist. Project Mockingbird, a telephone intercept activity, was conducted between 12 March 1963 and 15 June 1963 and targeted two Washington-based newsmen who at the time had been publishing news articles based on frequently quoting classified materials of this agency, CIA, and others, including top secret and special intelligence. So here's the Washington Post actually doing the thing that they just hunted down that 21-year-old kid for, okay? Kennedy established Project Mockingbird because he knew there was something rotten in Denmark. And by the end of the year, he's dead. But wait, there's a lot more. If you look into these documents, now you can read this page and you can see how the Rockefeller Commission helped to like get to the bottom of all this. Woo. They're the people who benefited from his death. The rise to power, the people who killed Kennedy, they're second generation of evildoers, if you want to put it that way. They're presently in power and running. So if we go to Operation Mockingbird here, Operation Mockingbird is an alleged large-scale program in the United States Central Intelligence Agency that began in the early years of the Cold War. What year specifically? 1963. What year did they kill Kennedy? 1963. Who did Ron Paul just say this past week killed Kennedy? The United States government, and specifically the CIA. So I would limit it to, hey, let's add MI6 because the CIA doesn't do these things and get away with it without help. Project Mockingbird contains the family jewels. Okay. In 1973, a document referred to as the Family Jewels was published by the CIA containing a reference to Project Mockingbird, which is their reaction because the CIA was running those people that Kennedy was running wiretaps on, which was the name of an operation in 1963 wiretapping two journalists believed to be disseminating classified information. The document does not contain references to Operation Mockingbird. That's why I wanted to disambiguate the two things, because project and operation are usually equated to the same thing in people's minds. Now, Operation Mockingbird used the Washington Post, and it was OPC's CIA founder, co-founder Frank Wisner, who was helping to run this, along with Cord Meyer. Now, if you look, what happened to Cord Meyer's wife, Mary Meyer? Oh, she was brutally murdered along a highway in DC because she had a diary about all these guys that were in the coterie that killed Kennedy. And so when you understand Operation Mockingbird or any of these types of angles, you're getting into one of the biggest unsolved, unaccounted assassinations in history, because they didn't stop. They gained power to use power. They reshaped the world in their image, and they're doing it right now during the Great Reset. These things are not disconnected. The war in Ukraine is a major part of changing the attitudes, values, behaviors, of beliefs of people right now and controlling interests. What do you think, Tony?
I mean, it's very well said by you. Certainly there's, I've stated this many times, but there's many different ways in which one can analyze the Ukraine war situation. As Jimmy pointed out, it's not a surprise as to what's been leaked. Like, we've been able to infer from the evidence. Obviously, there's, special operations, most likely. It's very highly probable going on there.
But now we know it's an internal document.
It's a failed NATO state. Of course, saying failed, I think, based on NATO's strategy, is probably successful. They wanted to sort of destabilize and hyper-nationalize aspects of Ukraine, and especially with the eastern Donbass, made up of areas that have Russian-speaking peoples. In other words, they knew it's going to be an easy place to destabilize. It only helps. Unfortunately, it helps the end goal of the World Economic Forum the most. You get the push for the potential. So you get the military-industrial complex gets its alongside the Federal Reserve. So they start, they get all these contracts, government awarded contracts. The Federal Reserve's printing tons of money. So the industry is very happy. On the geopolitical front, you have destabilization only further impacting Europe, but not just in mass migration, but more specifically in energy. And then you have the situation where they're still pushing for the climate agenda with the World Economic Forum. So all roads point to the one organization that happens to be an international organization that benefits the most from whatever fallout happens from this scenario would indeed be the World Economic Forum. They can blame the war on increased carbon emissions or displacement of peoples or issues with food supply and logistics. And that's kind of actually what they want. They need further destabilization to manifest the Great Reset. And I think it was either John Down or Greg Reese did a video specifically talking about that specific issue, which is interesting now that I think about it just off the top of my head. As far as the whistleblower side of it, I just think of 3 Days of the Condor, which I wasn't aware of that movie, but it was when you made me aware of it back. So I
think the book I think it's by Richard Condon, and it's called 6 Days of the Condor. But to make it into the movie, they call it 3 Days of the Condor.
3 days, yeah.
It's about the assassination of Salvador Allende. That was Operation Condor, that the CIA ran on September 11th, 1973. They like the date. It works for them. September 11th. 1971 is when Khrushchev had a heart attack, but the CIA had a heart attack gun at that time, and you should never think that they did something like that. So it's not.
And that was released in the Church Committee. right?
Right.
In the 1970s. So when you look at it from that standpoint, is there a precedent for the CIA making sure they control various nation states? Well, that seems to be a precedent that's been
I think
set
that's
for
what their
70 years.
Their mission statement is, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much at this point.
And when you look into the origins, so essentially, if you follow it through, MI6 is a superior, older intelligence agency. It trains the Americans to create CIA. And then with Operation Mockingbird, they have total control of the journalists. And then you can take out a president and cover it up. But you need an intelligence agency that's supported by the State Department that has that Anglo-American connection.
Right.
And will carry out the agenda from afar.
That's right.
Right. Across the ocean, so there's a bigger picture to be studied and learned from all this, because that same group, I mean, so think about it. That same group is with us where we at in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Iraq, all these places, Syria. Union Jack's right there with us.
Yep.
Union Jack's our best buddy, John Bull and Uncle Sam.
And that's my point. When it comes to precedents being set, we know what the CIA is about. We know what essentially American geopolitical strategy is. So looking back at it from that standpoint, when we look at whistleblowers, is it any surprise? So we've ever assumed, that the media ever had their best interests at any point in time.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.